This next section, we will go through an example using the DSA 152 inspection card as well as the inspection manual to show you how to actually properly complete the card and make use of the manual in the process of doing so. So for the example project, what we will have is described here in this scope of work. We have an alteration to one classroom building A and construction of a single one two-story classroom building B. And how many inspection cards would be needed in this situation? If you said 3 correct, you'd need 1 for building A, 1 for building B, and 1 for the site work. Of course, we'd want to get a little bit better understanding than what I just described there, so we'd want to take a look at the DSA approved plans for additional information. Upon doing so, you find that building A is removing a bearing wall between 2 classrooms. There's also the installation of a new sliding partition with a supporting steel beam and column and a new foundation supporting that column. And for building B, it's a 2-story lightwood frame classroom which is adjacent to building A. And there's some site work which is primarily providing accessible features to the new construction and the alteration areas described above. So we'll take a look at what some of the building A DSA 152 applicable sections and blocks for that building. That was the one that was having the alterations. So section 1 would have blocks 5 through 7. And this is just doing a quick little blow up of and zooming in on that part of the inspection card with the excavation, forms, and reinforcement. Recall that would be applicable because of the new foundation that is supporting the steel column, that's supporting the steel beam, and the sliding partition. Section 2, blocks 8, 12, and 15, because we have the foundation concrete, some steel vertical for the steel column and steel horizontal for the steel beam. Section 3, the applicable blocks would be blocks 16 and 19. And the ceilings, and the reason for the ceilings was because there would need to be some modification to the existing ceiling to remove that bearing wall and to have the sliding partition and to provide probably some bracing of that, some lateral bracing for that steel beam. And then there's going to be some modifications and new fire alarms that might be being put in as well. And for section 4, blocks 27 through 29, and these are going to be any other structural work or other fire life safety work or other accessibility work. This could be where you would have, due to the new classroom size that has the sliding partition now, such that you have a single room that may have maybe more than 50 occupants, such that now panic hardware may be required for the exiting doors, and so on. All of the other items for at least this building A are not applicable, so that's what you would provide in the date, and then you would still initial those items. And you could use the manual correlation matrix to help you with understanding which items you'd want to take a look at in further detail. Now let's take a look at building B and what the applicable blocks and sections are in the 152 card. Because this one is new construction, nearly all sections and blocks are going to apply, so it's probably easier for me to just identify which blocks are not applicable, and those would be primarily in section 2, and that would be some of the items for concrete, masonry, and steel. And you would just put the NA and your initials. While I'm lining out these items, you would not need to do that. That's just for visual preference to help show in this example to line out those particular items that would not apply for that building B, which is again that new construction with light wood frame. Again, you would use the manual correlation matrix. Let's go on ahead and do a little bit more digging and more depth. So on building B, if I want to go on ahead and take a look at this in more detail again, completing section 1 blocks. So let's take a look at, for the case of looking at excavations for the building itself, you'll see some of the highlighted sections within the correlation matrix here. So as I come over to the inspection manual now, you'll notice that I can click on this hyperlink here within the document, and it takes me to this section in the manual. And for the section that we're looking at, or the block that we're looking at, the block 5 with the excavations and shallow foundations, so there's an item here that would need to be checked from an inspection standpoint. Normally the Roman numeral 1 would be the documentation, but this is one of those exceptions where the Roman numeral 1 in this case is an inspection item rather than a documentation item. So anyhow, getting back to this, so block 5, so we'd want to make sure that there's no foreign material enters the foundation excavation, make sure the foundation's level or that there's steps as specified on the construction documents. The bottom of the footing extends to the right depth, and their proper proximity and location of adjacent footings is meeting the requirements, so on. So again, this is just showing some of the things you would find, and we can go back to the previous section we were looking at here, going back to block 5. To see some of these other sections that would be applicable. So with footings, well, we're not there yet, so I'll stop there. So after doing that, we would be able to come back to the card and sign off on the excavation items for the date and then initial for which that applied. Now we will move on to the next block. That would be block 6. Going back to the inspection manual now. So now we're going to be looking at forms. So again, for the shallow foundations that we're looking at, and we know that for the concrete foundations, so as you can see here, this cast in place concrete, this is applicable to blocks 6 and 7. We'll do that next. So if I click on this, notice the italics, then this will take me to that. So the cast in place concrete notes about for all cast in place concrete work, the following items apply, and it notes that you need to take a look at which chapter for further information. We scroll down, and these are actually for 7 and 8. So I'm just scrolling through right now. So for block 6, as far as inspection items, block 6, so again this is Roman numeral 2, there's formwork. You want to make sure that the formwork is following some of the information that is identified here, so as far as it has the right shape, location, dimensions, and so on. And we can always go back to after we're done looking through these items, as far as the tight joints, no wood stakes, no organics, and so on, properly coordinate between the trades to avoid the conflicts and so on. We can go back to the card. And after verifying those items through the inspection and the documentation, we come to the card and we will put the date and initial. Now we'll move on to the next block, steel reinforcement. And once again, now going back to the inspection manual, so for block 7 with a steel reinforcement, clicking again on this hyperlink takes us down to that section. So for the shallow foundations for concrete, again, we'll want to, as I've noted here, for this example, block 7 will apply, so we come up to the section noted, and then with regards to documentation for the reinforcing steel, so block 7, some of the shop drawings that are noted here as far as when applicable, receipt of the design professional reviewed steel reinforcing shop drawings and so on. Keep in mind, of course, whenever there are any conflicts between the DSA approved portions of the work, the DSA approved structural fire life safety and accessibility portions of the work or shop drawings, then the DSA approved construction documents apply. They govern basically. And then for block 7, with regards to the material testing that would be associated with the reinforcing steel here, so there's a material testing to make sure that the material complies with requirements, and there's some tagging requirements in IR 1710. We won't go to that right now. And then as we go back to the section we were at previously using the previous view, Scrolling down to here, make sure that to check for the embedded items also. As far as the steel, and this was something I missed before about making sure to check the underground utilities for blocks 5 and 6. And again, just trying to show you how you can navigate through the 152 manual. So after you've verified that, coming back to the card, then you would go on ahead and put the date and initials based upon those documentation and inspection items that you had completed for that system. Now continuing on with the remainder of this part of the card. So now we're going to look at the interim verified reports that will be needed prior to initialing the overall section. Some of those are shown here as far as the DSA 291. Once you receive that from the lab for the material test, then you can go on ahead and put the date and initial. Similar for the special inspection form, if you had an independent special inspector, the 292. And then for the geotechnical engineer, the DSA 293, you'd put the date and initial for that one. And then for the design professional, the architect, who was usually the one in general responsible charge, once you've received that interim verified report, you can sign off for that. And I think it's worth noting that when it comes to design professionals providing you with interim verified reports, the term personal knowledge is worth noting here. So this is an excerpt from the administrative code, the section dealing with verified reports. I'll just read this here. So the term personal knowledge as applied to an architect or registered engineer means the personal knowledge that is obtained from periodic visits of reasonable frequency to the project site for the purpose of general observation of the work, and that is obtained from the reporting of others on the progress of the work, testing of materials, inspection, and superintendence of the work. So I've added the emphasis there with the bolding and underline. But that kind of language has been present since about 2001 in the administrative code. So what DSA's interpretation of this particular section means is that there should be at least one personal visit in person by the design professionals during the course of construction. It's not required at all the milestones. However, we would certainly prefer to see that. But from a requirement standpoint, we're just sticking with the at least one per building. So once you've received all of the verified reports from the other design professionals, you can go on ahead and sign that off, and then your section 1 is complete. Now we'll get into looking at one of the other DSA approved construction documents, that is the DSA 103, and some of the items or categories that you will see for this project. I went through and filled out an example one. You'd have the soils, concrete, steel. We can also take a look at the exempt items and also the summary verified reports. As I scroll through this 103, I'll try to identify some of the features associated with it. So you see here there's the information related to the soils items for this example project. You'll notice that the check marks are those items that are applicable, and for those items that don't have the check mark are grayed out if those are not applicable to your project. See, there's quite a few sections here that are not applicable because the example project does not have driven deep foundations or piles, so that's why these are often grayed out. So I'm continuing to scroll on down here. Several subsections within the soils are not applicable. Now moving on to the concrete portion, you see the items that are checked here. Whereas there's no welding of reinforcing steel, at least in this example, so there's no check and it's grayed out. There will be several sections that we're going to have to scroll through here that are not applicable to our project. You'll see that those items are grayed out and do not have a check mark. Now moving on to the steel, we see several check marks associated with the structural steel for that project. And we're going to have several lengthy sections or several other sections that have not been checked, and then because of the welding there's going to be some items identified here, some check boxes. There's also some shop welding that's noted. And most of the other items, actually the remaining items in steel, are not applicable, and so therefore they do not have a check mark and are grayed out. Now we will take a look at the appendix, those items that include essentially work that is exempt from DSA requirements for structural tests and special inspections. And so you as a project inspector don't have to try to figure out which those items are. There is the requirement for the design professional to mark those items specifically on the approved construction document, so you are not left wondering which those might be. So for our particular project, example project, the design professional chose to identify that post-installed anchors for these situations do not require the normally expected special inspections or tests that DSA would have. Special inspections and tests may still be required according to other aspects of the building code, but it would not be associated with the DSA aspects. Continuing on, and with the listing of the verified reports, there's a summary page that would normally be signed by the design professional and have the DSA identification and approval stamp there. And here's our listing of verified reports that are applicable. So there's the soils one, the form DSA 293, the structural testing and inspection one that's often from the lab, the 291, and the concrete batch plan inspection, which is usually going to be covered by the lab as well through a combined report that covers tests and special inspections. And then there's the shop welding inspection, which often would be the combined verified report from the lab, the 291, since many of the welding special inspectors are employed by the lab, so the lab's verified report covers their special inspections. Or if it's an independently contracting special inspector, then they would need to provide a DSA 292. All right, and so you would then be able to look at the Appendix A in the inspection manual, which has the 103 correlation matrix, which we talked about earlier, and that will help to identify the corresponding manual sections that are based upon the specific testing and inspection items that are noted in the 103. When it comes to viewing the PDF files, especially with regards to the inspection manual, because it's so large, you should download that first onto your own personal device, and also to allow you to more easily navigate through it, because once you do, you can open it up in a PDF viewer, and there are hyperlinks you can take advantage of and bookmarks. There's also the word search, and you can refer to the resources tab for the 152 manual navigation to get more information about that. But I'll briefly go through and show you how to navigate within the PDF of the 152. While I was going through the examples with the inspection card and how to navigate it, I was going through and using some of the features in it, and I thought it would be helpful to go through and elaborate on that a little bit more. So first, what you should do is when you go to DSA's website, you should download the inspection manual locally, because it'll be far easier to work with once you've done so. And then once you have, I would recommend opening it up with some type of PDF reader. I happen to be using Adobe Acrobat, which is a little bit more sophisticated than the Adobe Reader. But I wanted to point out some of the features that I've provided to help show how an electronic copy may be more helpful than a hard copy. Of course, you can always print it out if you so choose. But here are some things that have been added to it. So there's a table of contents, all of which are hyperlinked. So you can go to these at any time, and if you click on these arrows, it allows you to quickly navigate to different parts of the manual. Also, within the document itself, you saw that I was using some of the hyperlinked aspects within the inspection matrix. So anytime you see a hand, then that's going to give you an idea about what's available as a hyperlink for some of these forms or other documents. I also made use of a previous view the forward view as well. So this allows you to go back within the document based upon the different pages that you've been to. And there's also the ability to use the find feature. I typically use Control F. If let's say that you have not had a project previously that had stone columns, you'll see that it'll go through and find all the locations where that word applies. Anytime you do see something that is in italics, that lets you also know that there is a hyperlink within the document, and you saw me make use of that previously. So here's another example of that. So there's would be some of the forms. You can always go back to the previous page that you were at, and so on. So these are some of the features that are included in here. If you ever happen to lose that table of contents with the bookmarks, if you click on this arrow on the left of the screen and then click on the image that looks like a ribbon, then this is how you can get back that table of contents essentially on the left hand side. Clicking that off, clicking it back on. And that should be helpful information. There's more information in the resources that goes into further descriptions about the different capabilities and functions and features from a PDF reader, both within Adobe Reader and also Bluebeam Review, that you may find helpful as you're making use of this document electronically. Thank you for your time. This is Ryan Huxley, and I'm a supervising structural engineer with DSA in Sacramento headquarters.